On November 4, 1914, the British vessel Endurance navigated through turbulent waters, heading toward Earth's most perilous and enigmatic continent, Antarctica. 28 people comprised the crew aboard this vessel. Leading them was an explorer named Sir Ernest Shackleton. He aspired to accomplish something nobody had achieved before: traversing the entire Antarctic continent on foot. In an era without smartphones, GPS, or modern technology, in temperatures plummeting to 50 degrees Celsius on this frozen continent, amid blizzards from one edge to the other, he wanted to cross this continent completely on foot. His strategy was to reach Antarctica's coastline via the Weddell Sea aboard this ship. Looking at the map, their intention was to land precisely here and begin trekking toward the South Pole. After crossing it, he would then walk across to the Ross Sea. This trek spanned 2,900 kilometers in total. If everything proceeded according to plan, completing it would require approximately 120 days. But how catastrophically this plan failed, and the hardships they faced, neither they nor anyone else could have imagined. November 5, 1914. Endurance arrived at a whaling station on South Georgia Island. This represented the final human settlement along their route. Looking at the map, this island group sits near South America's tip. Directly south lies Antarctica's protruding section, known as the Antarctic Peninsula. Adjacent to it is the Weddell Sea, a sea surrounded by Antarctica on three sides. Because of this geography, ice cannot easily flow outward, creating a dense, permanent ice layer. Weather conditions were poor that day. Conditions in the Weddell Sea were equally bad. People advised Shackleton to postpone this mission, as continuing under those conditions would be extremely risky. But Shackleton was insistent. It made no difference to him, and they proceeded. December 5, 1914. Endurance continued advancing, and soon their worst fears materialized. The Weddell Sea ice was substantially heavier and denser than anticipated, but Shackleton kept pushing forward. January 18, 1915. After navigating along the ice edges for some time, the ship became completely stuck. Several days later, some crew members observed a 15-foot-long opening in the ice approximately 50 meters from the ship. This opening represented their final hope for freedom. For 3 hours, the ship's engines ran at maximum capacity attempting to escape the ice. But the ship didn't move even an inch. Crew members disembarked and attempted cutting through the ice with available tools. But they failed. Gradually, the ice sheet trapping this ship was drifting farther from land. The Antarctic location where the crew planned to land is called Vassal Bay. But this ship kept drifting away. They drifted 60 miles away. The problem was water existed between the ice sheet and Vassal Bay, so the crew couldn't simply disembark and walk to the bay. Meanwhile, the ship remained trapped in ice. Months and weeks passed attempting to free the ship. They knew winter was approaching. And there, winter means 24 hours of darkness. For weeks and months, they wouldn't receive even a single minute of sunlight. Shackleton ordered everyone to spend winter aboard the ship. But winter meant even colder temperatures. There would be snowfall and blizzards. The ship faced increasing ice pressure. A photographer, Frank Hurley, was present on this ship with his camera. These photographs were taken by him then. In these, you can clearly observe how the surrounding ice was crushing the ship. September 30th, 1915. Cracks became visible on the ship, but the crew hadn't lost hope. October 24th, 1915, 6:45 p.m. Suddenly, due to immense pressure, the ice sheet fractured and one piece struck the ship. A heavy ice chunk broke Endurance's stern post, and water began seeping into the vessel. Crew members began working immediately. They attempted pumping out the water. They continued for 3 consecutive days. But water was entering faster than it could be pumped out. The temperature stood at 8.5°. Yet the crew was neither frightened nor anxious. Some attempted loosening the surrounding ice sheet to reduce pressure on the ship, but this proved ineffective. Water continued seeping into the ship quite rapidly, while ice pressure on the ship wasn't decreasing. Finally, Shackleton surrendered and ordered the crew to abandon the ship, to evacuate. Observing the situation, crew member Tom McLeod stated that none of them would return home. The ship had been trapped for over 9 months. October 27, 1915. A loud explosion echoed. When Shackleton turned around, he witnessed something truly shocking. The ship's rear had suddenly risen 20 feet. The rudder and stern post broke apart. The ship's wooden components began disintegrating. The ship's front filled with water. Thankfully, crew members had already abandoned the vessel by then. Subsequently, the water transformed into ice. Because of this added weight, the ship's front began sinking. As the ship sank, so did Shackleton's dream of crossing Antarctica on foot. But something far more precious was now at stake. Could they return alive? The crew possessed no radio, no telephone, no means of contacting the outside world. They were trapped on an ice sheet in the Antarctic Ocean, an ice sheet floating in water. On this sheet, there was a large ice formation where the crew established their camp. First, they decided to inventory their belongings. What did they have? How much food and water? They discovered they had 3 small boats, 1 sledge for moving across the ice sheet, some essential personal items, and approximately 1 month's rations. Only 1 month's food. There was minimal sleeping space at night. Many had to sleep on the ice. Most slept close together to avoid freezing. It was nearly impossible for a passing ship to locate them there, as they were in the Antarctic Ocean. No other ships ventured there. Over a year had passed since they last saw other humans. The rest of the world didn't even know with certainty if they were alive. They could neither send messages nor expect help. Shackleton possessed only one thing: faith in his skills and experience. But how long could this faith sustain him and his crew? What would they do once food was depleted? Establishing camp on ice wasn't a foolproof solution either, as the ice could fracture any time. They needed land. Shackleton performed calculations and estimations. He believed the nearest land was Paulet Island, approximately 550 kilometers across the icy sea, an island at Antarctica's tip. Ironically, in 1903, after a Swedish ship became stuck, some rescue equipment was left on Paulet Island, so that if another ship got trapped in Antarctica in the future, they could rely on this island for rescue. That equipment had been purchased by Shackleton himself. 12 years later, Shackleton needed it most desperately. The crew collectively decided to attempt reaching Paulet Island, carrying their supplies on the sledge. Shackleton ordered that each person was permitted to carry only up to 2 pounds of necessary luggage. Many had brought personal items from the ship, but Shackleton reminded them that nothing was more precious than their lives. Shackleton left behind some gold coins and his Bible in the snow. Photographer Frank Hurley had captured around 400 photographs. He possessed the photo negatives, but due to the 2-pound restriction, he could carry only 150 negatives. These 150 photographs later presented this historical event to the world. Several weeks later, due to food shortages, the puppies living with the crew had to be killed. They had nothing else to eat. After several days of preparation, goods were loaded onto boats and sledges. Each boat weighed approximately 1 ton. Pulling them wasn't easy. Fate wasn't favorable. By then, summer had returned to Antarctica, and temperatures were increasing, causing the ice sheet surface to become softer, making luggage pulling difficult. After 3 hours of arduous work, when the crew looked back, they saw they had covered only 1 mile. The road ahead kept deteriorating. Shackleton decided to camp there until this ice sheet floated closer to land. The ice sheet where they established their camp was later named Ocean Camp. Shackleton assigned work to every crew member so they wouldn't become bored or depressed. November 21st, 1915. Pressure on Endurance's rear had increased so dramatically that the ship began bouncing on the water. It became airborne briefly before sinking completely beneath the ice. Crew members were only several kilometers from the ship. They witnessed this entire incident. Although they had already abandoned the ship, seeing it sink like this left a profound emotional impact, as if their final link with the world had broken. Only the ice sheet remained, and the ocean camp they built on it. Over the following days, things proceeded well. But several weeks later, this ice sheet started floating eastward, farther from land. December 23, 1915. Shackleton decided to leave Ocean Camp and once again decided to walk. But after walking several kilometers, suddenly they faced thin ice and water. They could neither advance nor retreat. Once again, they established camp on this ice sheet. Considering the food shortage, Shackleton implemented strict controls. The crew received 1 biscuit daily, some diluted milk, some cocoa, and a small quantity of high-fat meat paste from their carried cans. Additionally, the crew began hunting seals and penguins they could find. In reality, there was a frightening food shortage, but Shackleton would often lie to his crew about food quantities to maintain their motivation. "Don't worry, lads. There's enough food to keep us alive." He knew that surviving this situation would require a long time. As such, mental strength would be most crucial. For many months, they lived in this new camp. Thankfully, the ice sheet moved in the correct direction. Days transformed into weeks and weeks into months. Eventually, a new year began. Morning of March 23, 1916. Shackleton could see something beyond the fog. As the fog cleared, they could see mountains. Shackleton recognized it as Joinville Island. But seeing Joinville Island wasn't particularly good, because this island was located at the peninsula's very tip. It meant they had floated so far on the ice sheet that they had left Paulet Island behind. Joinville Island was only 57 miles from Paulet Island. But westward, at a 90-degree angle, there was substantial ice between. Crossing this ice was nearly impossible, so Shackleton returned to his map. He could see that if they continued floating northward, only two more islands existed on the route: Clarence Island and Elephant Island. After this, nothing but water for thousands of kilometers. An ocean with waves so high that their survival chance would drop to almost zero. The water between South America's southernmost tip and Antarctica's northernmost tip is called Drake Passage. It's the world's most dangerous water body, with waves as high as 12 meters. More than 20,000 sailors have lost their lives in Drake Passage. Over the years, at least 800 ships have sunk in this Drake Passage. Even now in 2025, attempting to cross this passage on a ship, you'll witness such scenes. Drake Passage rocks even the largest cruise ships. Yes, Shackleton knew that reaching Drake Passage while floating on the ice sheet meant certain death for all. Meanwhile, food shortage had become severe. The waste meat scraps set aside for dogs, humans now had to eat the less odorous portions. To obtain drinkable water, everyone would hold a small can filled with ice close to their bodies to melt the ice using body temperature, obtaining some clean drinking water. But in these cans, they could collect only several tablespoons of water at once. An interesting fact here was that although 28 people comprised this crew, officially there were supposed to be only 27. In August 1914, when this ship departed from Britain, the 28th person, Blackborough, hid on the ship. Shackleton had already refused adding him to this crew. Still, he came aboard secretly. Later, when discovered, Shackleton told him directly that if they ran out of food, he would be the first human they'd eat. Thankfully, Shackleton's crew didn't have to go this far. They were fortunate to spot a sea leopard one day. They hunted it to obtain approximately 1,000 pounds of meat. Additionally, many crew members killed their dogs for food. After this, thankfully, for the next few months, no food shortage existed. April 7th, 1916. Floating on the ice sheet, the crew finally spotted Clarence Island. They estimated it was approximately 83 kilometers northward. This island renewed their hope. But then suddenly, the wind changed direction. The wind started blowing eastward. No islands existed in the east. No land. Within hours, Shackleton and his crew lost all hope. The ice sheet where they'd established their camp was shrinking. By this point, it was only 50 meters long. Remaining on this ice sheet was becoming dangerous for the crew. So Shackleton decided to load crew members into these 3 boats and advance toward Clarence Island. They had to wade through not only water, but also other ice sheets and icebergs. Some distance ahead, they encountered another solid ice sheet. There, they established a new camp. But as soon as they established their camp, a crack began forming on this ice sheet. Accidentally, one crew member fell into the water. That was fireman Ernest Shackleton. The remaining crew attempted extracting him from the water quickly. But before they could catch their breath, this ice sheet fractured into 2. Shackleton was left alone on one portion, and the remaining crew was swept into darkness on the other portion. Nobody knew what to do. Their leader, their commander, who had been leading them so long, suddenly disappeared into darkness. Fortunately, they heard Shackleton in the darkness. "Bring a boat." After this, some crew members brought Shackleton back on a boat. After reuniting with his crew, Shackleton first asked about Holness. He was shivering intensely. After falling into water, hypothermia risk increased. There was no way to ignite a fire. If nothing could be done, he would die shivering. Shackleton employed his skills and experience once again and ordered him to keep walking until his body heat could dry the clothes on his body. This poor individual kept walking the entire night. Eventually, this helped dry his clothes. He stopped feeling abnormally cold. Meanwhile, the wind kept changing direction repeatedly. The ice sheet would move one direction, then another. They changed their target 4 times. First, they believed they would reach Clarence Island. Then they thought they would reach King George Island. They even considered Hope Bay. Finally, they decided on Elephant Island. Elephant Island is the last island before Drake Passage. It was 160 kilometers away from them to the northwest. Since the iceberg was already moving northward, the temperature was gradually warming. The temperature had reached 8 degrees. The ice cover around them was becoming lighter. But conversely, it also meant fresh water supply was decreasing. They had almost exhausted their water. Everyone's lips were swollen and cracked due to thirst. Their throats were so dry that swallowing food was difficult. Everyone received raw seal meat so the blood would facilitate swallowing. Meanwhile, their ice sheet was slowly drifting toward Elephant Island. They were only 50 kilometers from Elephant Island. Shackleton ordered all boats brought down into the water. This final leg of their journey would be on boats. April 15, 1916. The crew couldn't believe their fate. The 3 boats reached the island safely, and after being on water for 497 days, crew members were finally standing on land. Having been through hell, this desolate, uninhabited lump of rock seemed nothing short of heaven. They couldn't believe their feet were actually on solid ground and not on ice. Everyone was ecstatic. But they didn't know their problems weren't over yet. Blackborough's legs had stopped functioning. Another crew member, Rickinson, suffered a heart attack after reaching the island. But somehow he still survived. The biggest problem was that Elephant Island was completely uninhabited. No humans lived there. Neither did it have rescue supplies nor means to contact others. This island was located where nobody went. No ship passed by. Their problem remained the same. How could they return home? Looking at the map, Shackleton saw 3 options. First, going to Cape Horn, South America's southernmost tip, approximately 800 kilometers northwest. Second option, going to the Falkland Islands, approximately 880 kilometers away east of South America. Or the third option was obtaining help at South Georgia Island to the northeast, 300 kilometers away. Options 1 and 2 were closer, but going there meant traversing Drake Passage. Shackleton chose the third option. He believed the sea and air would support them more if they went to South Georgia Island. The crew was so exhausted that bringing everyone along wasn't possible. Shackleton decided to take a small team of 5 to go to South Georgia by boat. Once there, they would request help from a ship. The team stranded on the island would establish their camp on Elephant Island. April 24, 1916. Shackleton and his team of 5 people set out for South Georgia Island. Looking at their planned route on the map, you'll see they cannot avoid Drake Passage completely. They would need to cross Drake Passage to reach the island. But no better option existed. In this small paddle boat, they entered the world's most dangerous water body. To travel such a long distance, they would take turns rowing the boat for 4 hours and resting for 4 hours. But how well could they rest in this small boat? Their journey was spent getting drenched by waves, vomiting, and being exhausted. In April, winter begins for Antarctica. The sun would be in the sky for only a few hours, and they'd be in darkness for more than 20 hours. These few sunlight hours were crucial because only then could they use their sextant to navigate direction, whether they were sailing toward the correct direction. They kept sailing for hours. Hours transformed into days. On the way, water would enter their boat and they'd pump it out. A few times, such large waves occurred that it almost sank the boat. For a while, it seemed the boat wouldn't survive. But by chance, they survived and kept advancing. They had some food with them in the boat, but there was a problem. There wasn't enough deck space for them to sit upright and eat. That's why they couldn't swallow food properly. So they had to lie down to eat. The condition on this boat was so difficult that Shackleton's courage was slipping away from him. It was becoming too difficult for him. When a bird started circling their boat, he started shouting at it in anger. This pent-up frustration was eating at his courage. But eventually, after sailing for days, they were close to their destination. They were only 3 miles from South Georgia Island. But before they could celebrate, there was a sudden sea storm. Their boat was trapped in this storm. The waves got uncontrollable. The boat kept bouncing and crashing. These people had no more strength. They put their paddles down and gave up. The storm kept throwing their boat this way and that. Several hours later, when the winds calmed and the clouds began clearing, they saw South Georgia Island. Only 1 mile remained. Seeing this island, they used all their remaining strength. All of them started paddling. The waves were still quite strong. Shackleton started feeling the end was near. The boat felt stationary, but in reality, slowly but surely, they were moving closer to the island. After fighting storms, winds, and water for 3 consecutive weeks, finally on May 10, 1916, they set foot on South Georgia Island, the same island from which they had set out on their journey to Antarctica 522 days ago. A wave of happiness ran through them. Shackleton and the crew members hugged each other. But this wasn't the end of their struggles. Actually, South Georgia Island is more than 100 kilometers long. The beach they'd landed on was on the opposite side from the human settlement. The human settlement and the whaling station were exactly on the opposite side of this island. They now faced two ways to reach the whaling station. First, getting back on the boat and traveling 130 miles by sea to get to the island's north. The second option was walking to the island's north. They had to walk only 29 miles. But the problem was that such dangerous mountains exist on South Georgia Island that no person in history had been able to cross this island on foot. It was considered impossible to cross this island on foot. So, obviously, they chose the boat. But, of course, there was yet another problem. Their boat had been so badly damaged by rough waves that it wasn't in suitable condition. They had no option other than to walk. The alternative was to attempt crossing the island. The island of South Georgia had never been crossed by anybody. The whalers regarded the country as inaccessible. Shackleton was not one to give up now. Not at this point. They had endured so much over the past year. They couldn't give up now. To survive, they were now faced with a challenge no human had ever attempted before. These 10,000-foot-high snowy mountains had to be crossed somehow. Shackleton decided to first rest and rebuild their lost strength. So they stayed in a cave and ate for the next 9 days. Thankfully, there was no food shortage on this island. The island was swarming with albatrosses, seals, and penguins. After resting for 9 days, on May 19, 1916, at around 3 a.m., they set off from King Haakon Bay. He had only 2 other crew members with him, Worsley and Crean. Worsley and Crean were coming with me. And after consultation, we decided to leave sleeping bags behind and make the journey in very light marching order. Now their first challenge was that nobody knew where to go and how. The snow was up to their knees. The mountains were so high that they couldn't see beyond them. They climbed the mountains one after another and looked for the way from the top. If they couldn't find a way, they would go back. This happened several times. They climbed as many mountains as they could see. On some mountains, they found deep gorges, and on others, walls of rock. Whenever they couldn't find a way to proceed, they retreated and descended to climb another mountain. With the complete clearance of the mist, we saw, to our sharp disappointment, what we had taken for a frozen lake was an arm of the sea. Shackleton said grimly, "We shall have to go on to the next, boys." This happened 3 times. Over the next few days, they had climbed all surrounding mountains. Even after climbing the last mountain, they couldn't find anything new. They were staring at a deep valley with a steep and dangerous slope. The situation looked grim enough. Fog had cut off our retreat. Darkness covered our advance. It was useless to continue in this fashion. By then, they couldn't retreat anymore. They tied themselves along a rope and started cutting stairs into the mountain. Literally, they made stairs to descend the mountain. After descending for some time, they spotted the Stromness whaling station. And other humans, after climbing the mountains for 36 hours, on May 20th, 1916, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean successfully crossed the Allardyce mountain range and reached the Stromness whaling station. It was the first time in history that someone had crossed South Georgia Island on foot. The level of impossible feat they achieved can be understood by the fact that after Shackleton, this was accomplished only in 1955 by expert climbers with full preparation. Shackleton had neither tents nor sleeping bags. They had courage, determination, and a strong will. When Shackleton and his companions finally reached the whaling station, it was difficult to identify whether they were humans. Their beards had grown excessively long. Their faces were dark, with only their eyes visible. Their clothes were all torn. Eventually, the factory manager at the station recognized them and identified him as Shackleton, the guy who had gone missing with his team in Antarctica 2 years ago. Every person at the South Georgia station knew Shackleton and his crew's story. Everyone knew about it as a tragic incident. The man who died with his ship. They couldn't believe the same man was standing before them 2 years later. The factory manager gave them food and new clothes immediately and a bed to sleep in. The 3 bathed and shaved. The next day, Worsley arrived at King Haakon in a boat to rescue their 3 other companions. The 3 people still waiting for Shackleton on the island's other side. But Shackleton's real concern now was the 22 crew members stranded on Elephant Island. It had been more than a month since they last saw them. Were they still alive? In such a dire situation, how long would someone be able to remain motivated enough to survive? Especially when you don't even know if your captains could successfully cross Drake Passage or not. On the other hand, will anyone come to rescue you or not? Shackleton tried his best to rescue them from Elephant Island as soon as possible. But when he reached there with another ship once again, the rescue ship got stuck in ice. He tried again, but it didn't work. The same thing happened the third time. In 3 months, he tried thrice to go to Elephant Island to rescue them, but he had to turn back his ship all 3 times. As time passed, Shackleton kept getting more worried. He specially requested the British government to give him an ice-breaking ship. He was given a ship called Discovery, but it would have taken some more weeks to arrive. Shackleton was in no mood to wait. He didn't know how long they would be able to hold out. Another ship was requested from the Chilean government. He was given a ship named Yelko. On August 25, 1916, he left for Elephant Island again aboard this ship. It took him about 6 days, but this time he reached Elephant Island successfully on August 30th. He was shocked by what he saw when he reached the island. Actually, these 22 people who remained on Elephant Island, Shackleton knew they would need leadership, or else they would become depressed and frustrated. So Shackleton made one of them, Frank Wild, the leader. After Shackleton left on Frank Wild's orders, they built a shelter by turning over the 2 boats. They remained there for 128 days. They used to hunt penguins and seals to feed themselves. Amidst the cold, hunger, and disappointment, Frank Wild repeated the same thing every morning. "Pack your bags. The boss can come today." Boss referred to Shackleton. But the boss didn't come. Days transformed into weeks and weeks into months. But every morning, Frank would get up and repeat the same thing. "Pack your bags. The boss can come today." Every morning, Frank climbed the hill to check whether a ship arrived or not. And every evening, he returned disappointed. After 4 months, people's courage was beginning to wane. Things were getting more difficult. Blackborough's leg was grossly infected. It was a gangrene infection, so they had to cut off this leg. With every passing day, they were closer to believing that Shackleton couldn't actually reach South Georgia. His boat might have sunk on the way. It had been 4 months and 6 days since Shackleton left. Frank Wild had decided to move ahead. At Frank's order, they really packed their bags, but not in hopes of being rescued. This time, they were planning to sail. They started preparing to leave for Deception Island. But before they could leave Elephant Island, they spotted something far in the sea. A huge ship was sailing toward them. This was the ship Yelcho. Once the ship was close enough, they could see their commander and boss, Shackleton. From the man on duty outside, we heard a sudden yell. "Wild," he shouted. "Wild, there's a ship. Haven't we better light a flare?" Their boss was finally there to rescue them. Shackleton was stunned to see them. All 22 of them were alive. They hadn't given up. After fighting ice, mountains, and oceans for almost 2 years, Shackleton and his crew returned home. When we landed, they welcomed us so heartily that they nearly pushed us into the sea again. It was truly miraculous. Shackleton left with 27 people and returned with all 27 people. It was possible only because of Shackleton's leadership and courage, the determination of the crew, and their unbreakable teamwork. 106 years after this incident, in 2022, investigators were conducting some research in the sea. Then, in the Weddell Sea, 10,000 feet below the surface, they found Shackleton's ship, Endurance. The state of preservation is just absolutely brilliant. There are no wood-consuming marine parasites in the Weddell Sea. It's truly amazing that it took 106 years to find the wreckage of this ship. And even after 106 years, since it sank so close to Antarctica, it is in remarkably good condition. Today, if you ever go to South Georgia Island, you will find Shackleton's grave there. He set out to accomplish a historic feat, to be the first man to walk across Antarctica. Although his original plan failed, he did something even more miraculous, much more amazing.